bring up my number here. Okay, well, we can just maybe cover some just basics here this morning while we're waiting for everyone else to join us. Anyway, thank you all for joining us this morning for our first webinar of the year. We are hoping to hold one the last Thursday of every month. And right now we're just kind of lining up speakers for the remainder of the first half of the month. We're looking at preservation funding, energy funding, grant writing speakers, but please be sure to hold those dates, and we'll have something exciting for you there. There are, as far as handouts, Cynthia, I see in the notes, I did send out a spreadsheet that Mike provided for us. So there will be that. And as you probably heard, we are recording the session, so that will be available. Mike, I assume you'll also just let us have the PDF of the presentation as well, since we're recording it to make available to our attendees.
Yes.
Okay, thanks, Mike. So anyway, again, thank you all for joining us. Just a quick introduction. I'm sure you all know us here at Colorado Main Street, but I'm Tracy Stoffel, the Main Street Specialist. We also have on the call this morning our fearless leader and statewide coordinator, Gail Langley. Larry Lucas, our Main Street architect, and Will Cundiff, who is our grants financial administrator for the Community Development Office. Sorry, almost forgot what division I'm in here. But anyway, we're all here for you, whether you're an official Main Street or an affiliate, or just joining us for this webinar. If you ever have any questions about how you might be able to help your downtown, we're here to help you out. With that, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen and let Mike start sharing his. Mike Scholl is with one of our pre-qualified consultant pool, Ayers and Associates. We do a lot of work with them, and it is fabulous. They do fabulous work, and we're very excited that he offered this up to our members and communities here in Colorado. Mike, take it away.
Sure, thanks, Tracy. I appreciate it. I'm going to share my screen. One of the things I think that's exciting about doing this presentation, and it's think like a developer, take charge of the real estate in your downtown, is right now with DOLA having the 1271 money out, there's a lot of resources available right now to kind of start to think about taking on some of these challenging real estate projects in your downtown, particularly as it around housing. And I know that I imagine probably most, if not all of you, could claim to have some housing issues in your community. So, and I'll get into that a little bit, but let me jump in real quick. And I want to just pose a quick question to everyone. And I know, do you have that building? I mean, if you have, just kind of raise your hand or show me or nod your head on the video. That one building where everyone says, Jillian does, I see that, and that you wish that, you know, if you could just do something with it, it would change the dynamic, it would open people's eyes, it would just make people feel better. Great, I see people, good. So this one that you're looking at right now, this is was a dry cleaner that I had to deal with in Loveland, Colorado. It was, you can't really, that gangly looking tree, there was on the side of that building, it was dripping kind of a blue liquid that was not a color that's not seen generally in nature. The owner, it was actually operating, the owner of the dry cleaner they were going out of business. They weren't paying on their mortgage. The bank didn't want to foreclose because they didn't want it, because clearly there was an environmental issue, and this was right in the heart of our downtown. And so, you know, I had to go to our city council, and they said, why, and say, you know, hey, we need to buy this building. And they looked at me like I was the most, you know, craziest person on the planet. Why would you want to buy a dirty building that, you know, requires cleanup? And we were able to get some grant funding, you know, from, at the time, it was the Obama stimulus funding. But we were able to kind of access some funds to do the cleanup, but there was still some cost to acquire it and maintain it and manage it. And I made the case that, look, if you don't buy it, who will? Who's going to? And we became, for better or for worse, the developer of last resort. And I think in a lot of communities, I think that's what's occurring. You know, you don't have that opportunity. You know, it's not like developers are chomping at the bit to come in and take on these challenging buildings. and for better or for worse, you become the developer of last resort if you want anything to happen. So, so this is actually what's there today. This is a First Run movie theater. Actually, if you could see my cursor, maybe not on the right corner, that's where that building was. We were able to kind of do the demolition. We had to dig out 19 feet down of dirt and ship it off to landfills that could accept kind of the volatile VOCs, the volatile organics. And we got a developer and we're able to kind of do this project, I think, over time. It didn't happen overnight. This was about a 10-year process. It does take time, but for me, it was always a good lesson to share that persistence is, when you're dealing with real estate projects, it takes time, and persistence is a virtue. So, and I want to help you understand both where to start and how to be persistent. So what I like to kind of share this at the very beginning, and just kind of so you understand what my goals are, and sharing kind of my knowledge in this presentation with you. And what I want you to do is demystify the real estate development process. It's not, there's nothing special about what a developer does that you need, that you can't do on your own, especially on a smaller scale. I want to empower you to complete your own financial analysis. I know Tracy sent out an Excel spreadsheet that you can use and start plugging in numbers. And I'm going to go through that. I will share the presentation as well, so you can use it as reference. And if you ever kind of have it and you're confused and you're like, I don't know what I'm doing, feel free to call me. I'm not, as a professional courtesy, we're more than happy to sit down and talk with people and help you kind of work through an analysis in your downtown. Because personally, and this is my philosophy, I would rather have you spend your time and resources doing the analysis yourself and then waiting till you really need somebody like me or somebody else or some whatever consultant or DOLA person you need. Because resources are finite, and the more you can do on your own, I think the better off and the further along you'll be. So I want you to understand how to do that. And also, if you do have opportunities to deal with developers, I want you to understand how to negotiate as an equal partner. Because a lot of times when you're in these discussions, you wonder, like, are we giving away too much? Are we not? What are they telling us the truth, or what's happening? So what I want you to be able to do is understand what's going on from the developer perspective, so that you can understand when you're in those discussions, you could sit as an equal partner. And I also want to give you some strategies. I want to show you the front door, the so to speak, where you can start, and when you have these challenging buildings, how to kind of recognize and understand and move forward, and not just kind of get stuck. Because I think a lot of times, a lot of these communities, you get stuck in this perpetual kind of what if, and so I want you to kind of walk away with those skills and knowledge. So when you start in your downtown, you say, I just got this great presentation from this guy, and we want to start taking on real estate. You go to your board chairs, you go to the town managers, and they say, well, they're going to say it's risky, right? Real estate, it's risky. They're going to say it's scary. What happens if we buy a building and nothing happens? And we're going to have a building, and I'll talk about that too. And they'll say, well, it's complicated. We can't do it because it's too complicated. You're going to hear that all the time. And you're going to hear, no, we can't do it. We can't, a lot. So when that's okay. I mean, that's part of it. And I think you're going to hear a lot of reasons to say no, but it's hard to get to yes. I think Ed McMahon from the Urban Land Institute there's a great talk, and he says, he kind of talks about this a little bit about, you're going to hear no 1,000 times before you get to yes. So keep in mind, don't be discouraged when you're starting to take on some of these projects, because they are important and they can really be transformational. And also, there's a couple concepts I want you to understand and ways you can kind of ameliorate some of those criticisms. One is opportunity cost. And when going back to the example of the dry cleaner, I went to our city council and I said, there's an opportunity cost to not buying the building. I said, if you don't buy the building and you let it sit, you're going to drag down everything in the downtown for the next 10 years, and you're going to lose all that revenue. So there's a cost to doing nothing. And I think a lot of communities, I think you can understand and appreciate that, that you know, when these buildings sit vacant, they affect everything else around it. They affect the perception of your community. And I think there is a cost to doing nothing just as much as there's a cost to doing, you know, on both sides. So keep that in mind when you have those discussions. So now that I've kind of got your rapt attention and you're convinced, you're going to ask me, okay, I'm all set. I'm ready to go be and think like a developer. Where do I start? So let's get into just some real basics. And this actually, I copied this into the Excel spreadsheet just so you have it as reference. The first step in the real estate is really to develop a concept. What do you want to do? And really the first step too is getting control of the real estate. And that is the one thing I want you to understand. If you control the real estate, you control your future. That is a key cornerstone concept that I share with everyone in the community. If you control the real estate, you control your future. When you leave it in other people's hands, you're subject to whatever they want to do or do nothing. And a lot of times communities don't want to do anything. So you have this white elephant building, what is your concept for it? Do you want to tear it down? Do you want to, is it in bad condition? Do you want to build something new? Is it a historic building that you want to rehab? Like understand what is it? What can you do with that building? You want to look at the market. You know, where's the demand? Is there demand for retail? Is there, I mean, in this case, I think a lot of folks have demand for housing. What are the rental rates? You know, what is the business dynamic? Is it owner operated businesses in your downtown? Are there, you know, what are the lease rates? Go on the HUD, you know, the fair market rents, and kind of see what rents are charging, because it'll be important when you start plugging those numbers into that spreadsheet that I shared with you. And then if you got control of the real estate, you've developed your concept, you went out and you looked at the market, and then you start looking at your preliminary design and due diligence. That's when you start bringing in your architect, you look at your environmental, and start putting that together in that pro forma that I shared with you, and understanding what your costs are. And then the next steps, you know, you can go through financing. I'm actually working right now with the Laramie Main Street Alliance in Wyoming. They're actually acting as their own developer. I've been assisting them. They're building out 3 units of residential and on a 3rd floor of a building that they own. We're closing on the financing on Monday. We're delivering products to their market in the market rate residential. In August of this year, they'll be on the market. And once complete, they'll generate $15,000 to $20,000 a year in residual income to the organization, plus the equity. So think about that piece of it too. I mean, if you're going to act as your own developer, they're now generating their own income and creating their own organizational sustainability, which is pretty exciting for them. So anyway, you can look at at this as well. So going back to the steps. I mean, you know, looking at understanding what is your concept, and I think one of the other cliches is investment follows vision. You know, understand what it is you want to do, and because there may be times when you can't acquire the building, or a building or a property, or there's a developer who comes in and says, well, I'll do it, or somebody in the community who's willing to kind of take a risk. And I think it's important if you can say, you know, this is what we want to do with this building. This is what we're willing to support. Because even when you're dealing with a developer, they want to know that you're going to be a good partner with them. So I think be careful about that. You know, that you're clear about what it is you want, and be flexible too. Because I think the other thing is, you know, we get stuck on these, you know, exactly what we want. Things will change, and you have to be prepared for that. So understand your market. Don't get discouraged. Look at what your lease rates are and understand the demand. You know, you can look at the assessor's records. If you have brokers, real estate brokers, there's always a few in every community. Kind of talk to them, talk to the property owners, and see what some of those lease rates are and those prices are. These are the reason why I'm going through this is when you start to do this research, These are the variables, the inputs that you'll use in that spreadsheet to help you do that analysis. Once you get to that point, you're looking, you want to do residential, you understand how much the building costs or what it's going to take. Start your evaluation. I mean, what are the issues that you're looking at? Is it historic? Or, can you get some historic grant funding for it potentially? Are there any environmental concerns? I mean, old buildings have asbestos. They have lead pipes and they have mercury switches, and sometimes they have foundation issues and they need elevators. I mean, I had to put an elevator on a historic building that was built in 1936 that we used a closet. There was literally a built elevator in a closet in a historic building, which was a lot of fun and not cheap. And is there some other priorities, an economic development priority for the county or for the city? And is there surplus public property? I mean, one of the things too that always frustrates me is when cities are just so anxious to just throw off property. They own it and they're like, we don't want to own, we just want to get rid of it. We don't want to deal with it. And they just give it to whoever, and they don't really think about the long term. You're in the forever business. I mean, when you're doing redevelopment and you work in these communities, you are in the forever. Your town has probably been in existence for 50 years, and you hope and you're working so that it'll be strong and healthy for the next 50 years. So keep that in mind. I mean, when you just give away when there's property like that, sometimes it's important to make the case that there's a higher and better use that will help kind of strengthen the community, as opposed to just giving it away to the quickest, dumping it off to the quickest bidder. And then if you have these buildings, go find a building official, go walk with them, see what the issues are. That's always a lot of times they'll do that. Or if you have an architect or local architect that's interested, go check that out. And so I've brought up lease rates a couple times and understanding this market, and lease rates matter because it's an expression of your economic health. I mean, is there a robust market right now? And I know in a lot of smaller communities, there's not a lot of leasing availability. It tends to be more owner operated just because the real estate is so inexpensive. But I think keep that in mind, both the price to buildings and the lease rates, because it's an expression of your overall economic health. I mean, if buildings are going down or if they're flat, then that means you're not getting investment. I mean, if you're not generating income from your buildings when you're downtown, that means that you don't have the income to invest back and to keep them strong and healthy and lease them out. So keep an eye on that piece as well. And the one thing I think I want to impress when you're thinking like a developer, and I'm going to repeat this multiple times, developers don't buy buildings. We love buildings. We're all Main Street people. We do historic. We go and we think, oh, these buildings are wonderful. Developers and investors buy income. They look at buildings as a source of income, not as a building. So think about that. I'm not asking you to kind of we do like the historic nature of the buildings. I think it's great. And I think it's there's a lot to be said for preserving the character, but when you're thinking like a developer, think in terms of income, not in terms of buildings. So, the income that you generate will drive investment. Obviously, if you're making more, if you get more in, higher level of income, you're going to invest in the building. And if you can invest in the building, you can get a higher level of tenant, and a higher level of tenant can do better sales. You can charge better lease rates for residential. And then that drives higher lease rates, which then drives income. So this is how the kind of that income cycle works. So just keep that in mind when you're kind of doing your analysis of those buildings in your town. So this is where it gets fun for me, because I get to start getting into Excel spreadsheets and digging in a little bit and talking about numbers. So if I do go through some of this stuff, please stop me. Please ask a question. I'm more than happy. I know sometimes I talk fast. I apologize. But again, thinking about developers buying income, I just went yesterday and I was just poking around LoopNet and looking at what some of the lease rates are in some of the Colorado communities. And, in Denver, kind of a commercial lease rate, you get $30 a square foot. So looking at just a hypothetical 5,000 square foot building, if I go buy that building in Denver, I can lease it out for $30 a square foot and generate $150,000 of income. If I go to Granby, which is actually doing quite well in a lot of respects, I saw there's a couple buildings for $12 a square foot. So I get 60,000. Steamboat is, mountain town, they're getting 40. That they're, and then, there are other smaller communities that poked around, and they're at $5 and $6 a square foot. So if I'm looking at this and I'm a developer, where do you think I'm going to gravitate to? I'm going to gravitate to Steamboat Springs and Denver and other communities. And so that's what my point earlier was, with some of these buildings, hope is not a strategy. I mean, if you have this building in your community and you've been desperate to see something happen and nothing's happening, sometimes you have to be your own developer, because developers are like water. They follow the path of least resistance. They're going to go where the income is. And in a lot of your smaller communities, that those opportunities aren't there to the way they are in bigger markets. So you're not going to get that depth of investors and developers. And I think you have to think about taking on that role yourself a little bit more, at least to prime the pump and to get things started. So that's why I shared that. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in the context of the example, the spreadsheet. The next one I want to talk about is shift gears a little bit and talk about how kind of revenue drives income. If I have like a 3,000 square foot, which is a typical restaurant in the downtown, that you give or take, some could be smaller and larger, but 3,000 square feet is about average. If I'm a 3,000 square foot restaurant and I'm doing $200 a square foot annually, my gross income is about $600,000. And probably if I run a really tight ship and in restaurants, because I know a lot of downtowns are kind of restaurants and bars they're entertainment districts, and they're important draws for a lot of the communities. My profit is going to be $18,000 to $21,000, and that's after you pay your rent, you pay your employees, you pay your equipment, all in service debt. But that's a really fine line. I mean, if I'm an operator and I'm working 7 days a week or 6 days a week and I'm owning it and I'm bringing home 18 or 20,000, I'm going to burn out. And the same thing if you look at $400 a square foot on a 3,000 square foot restaurant. You can see that the income. What I'm trying to kind of articulate is the other element of this, and this the other part of the Main Street, is when you're doing these events and you're driving, you're bringing people into the community, into the downtown. You're generating income for the property owners, the building owners, which in turn promotes greater investment in the building. So, and the more retail sales, the more sales and opportunity you can get, the more investment you're going to get back in that building. Yeah, so if you look at here at a 200, if you're doing $200 a square foot, if you look, so generally as a rule of thumb, 6% of your income when you're a restaurant goes to paying your costs, your occupancy costs, your utilities, your rent, and so on and so forth. And so if I'm doing $600 a square, or $200 a square foot, and I'm grossing 600,000, my potential lease rate is $12 a square foot, which isn't bad. But again, if you look at how that accelerates as you get, as you do more, you can understand if I'm taking in $36 a square foot and I'm getting income, I'm going to keep that building. I'm going to be reinvesting in that building and making sure it's in good condition. So this is just a way to illustrate how that income drives that investment back in that building. I'd like to pause for just a second before I get in. Are there any questions or any confusion or anything I can?
Mike, I have a question.
Sure.
If you go back to the previous slide, one of the things in my previous life, long before Main Street, was that getting that over that $500,000 mark in gross income for smaller businesses. And it's a huge leap between doing $500,000 a year to 1.2 million. Do you have any suggestions to get folks thinking about how to take a look at a business that, you know, is only doing $500,000? When I was working with venture capitalists, they were always trying to get to the $1 million mark because of some of these numbers that you're showing, and it was extremely challenging. So
Right.
that's my question.
Well, and I think if you look at like a lot of the, if you're in kind of downtown Boulder or places or Collin, to survive, just to kind of survive with your lease rates, you're probably having to do at least $900 a square foot. And I think part of what you're hitting on is I see it, the kind of the pillars of Main Street, the marketing and the promotion and the event pieces of it. Why you do those things is to drive the economics of your downtown. I mean, you want to bring people in to the downtown, both singular events, but hopefully I've always felt like you do events not because you want to bring people down once, but because you want them to come back. You want to introduce them to something that they haven't, like, oh, this is a really good restaurant. We had a really good time. Let's go down there. We'll get a babysitter for the kids and we'll come down, and I think, and that helps to drive those sales, because in so much as you can drive that and create that income, as I said, and I think Gail, as you were kind of alluding to, you help drive the economics of your downtown and help create investment back into those buildings to keep them healthy and sustainable. Cynthia, you have a question?
Yes. I can't seem to keep my picture, so just please forgive me. What about the scenario, and this is something that we have people doing here, instead of renting the space, we have people purchasing the building and then bringing in income from those second and third floors for housing so that they have something to fall back on. Is that a good way of approaching things, or are we just?
Yeah, no, I think the getting income from multiple sources at a building is great. I mean, I think the more income you can generate from the building, like I said, the more, whether it's for commercial or second floor kind of residential, the more you can get from it, I think the more investment you're going to get back into the building. I think one of the things that makes me sad when Matt and I are traveling and we go into a lot of small towns and you look up, I always look up at the second floor and see if they're boarded up or if they're occupied, because you have a community. I've been in all the rural communities, and the thing I hear all the time is we don't have enough housing. We don't have enough housing for teachers, for nurses, for people that want to stay. And then you look up and there's a second floor, like, and it's empty. And you think, what a missed opportunity. And I think part of it too, and Cynthia, I thank you for bringing that up, in so much as, if you're a Main Street manager, you can go, hopefully what I'm trying to empower you to go do, find the property in your downtown where I could do 4 units in the upper floor, plug in some of the numbers and go to the property owner and say, here's what we think it might cost. Let's see if we can't help you figure that out. And then on top of it, these days you've got the incentive money from DOLA that you could potentially bring to the table. So Matt, you had your hands up.
Yeah, just a quick observation to Gail's comment. I think this starts to illustrate the fact that we really need to make sure that our businesses are right-sized, so that they're not just occupying the building that they happen to own, but really thinking about how much square footage they're utilizing for individual businesses. And, I think to Cynthia's point, having that income from the upper floors is also critical. And also not trying to make, an 8,000 square foot building viable on just a coffee shop alone. Really thinking about a diversity of uses to where you're not kind of oversaturating the business with the square footage of the building. So, the one example that comes to mind is in Buena Vista, where they had a yogurt shop, a breakfast and I think it was breakfast, lunch, and dinner restaurant, and also a Outfitter Trails rec store, all within the same building. So having that diversity of uses is definitely a positive thing to think about.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks, Matt. That's a really good point. I mean, I think in, in so much as you can kind of help the businesses kind of think about that, I think it promote kind of strategies that kind of help occupy those buildings. I have a similar example in Laramie that I work with. There was I think it's like an 8,000 square foot building, but the bottom was a Hallmark store. The old, back in the day, every downtown had a Hallmark store. Well, now Hallmark they're downsizing. And the building was actually laid out for three, based on structural, it was 3 units. And so they were actually now going to consolidate into one 1,500 square foot unit and then lease out the other two-thirds of the downtown. So, or the building. So things like that, I think that if you can help, and it also that, to Matt's point, when you're looking at code issues and you're dealing with like bathrooms and things like that, I think the more you can share that space, especially on the first floor, I think the more cost effective you can help people get in. So let me, I don't see any other hands up. So what I'm gonna do now is shift gears, and I have a hypothetical case study, and I'm gonna go through this is where it's relevant to the spreadsheet that was provided to you. And what I want to do is take a hypothetical 15,000 square foot building, not generally typical, 3 stories, first floor retail, second and third floor residential, and start plugging in, kind of showing you kind of a how to use that tool that we provided for you in your downtown. So when you open the spreadsheet, you're going to get the first tab is the hard costs worksheet. Hard costs refer to anything that's including acquisition of the building, but anything that you can feel and touch. So nails, wood, HVAC units, and the cost of labor to install it. So it's all the construction materials and labor. And then also there's a line in there for demolition, and that includes any environmental abatement. If you need to go in and the ceiling is asbestos and you need to remediate that, you can plug in some numbers. I plugged in just looking at kind of the cost of the building. I'm in the downtown. I went and talked to the property owner and he said, I live in New York or California or somewhere else, and I don't want this building, but I'll sell it to you for $525,000. Okay. And I walked through it and I see that we're gonna have to go kind of rip out some things, asbestos and maybe floor tiles. So I'm gonna plug in about $5 a square foot. Now, when you start to look at the building, there's no magic to these numbers at this stage. It's really just thinking about, okay, I know I might have to do something, so I'm gonna plug in a number to understand. And then as you go forward, you'll fine tune these more. But when you start, don't be afraid that it doesn't have to be exact. Just looking at kind of rough estimates. So I'm thinking it's the $5 a square foot. I'm looking at this hypothetical building. There's an existing retail on the first floor right now. It's already occupied, so it's not going to cost me, maybe I'll spend $15 a square foot to kind of create different units or put in a bathroom or something like that. So it won't cost, so I'm going to plug in $15 a square foot for that. And then I look at the second and third floor and I'm thinking, oh, nobody's lived up there. Part of it is understanding, is it being used? The more, if it's been used generally, then I think you can kind of estimate a little less. But if it's been vacant for a period of time, that's where that cost per square foot goes up. Generally speaking, it used to, when I started doing this, I plug in about $75 a square foot for rehab. With construction costs these days, maybe you're probably looking at maybe 100, depending on the condition of the building. But I'm going to say, that this building is in modest condition. It needs some work. Maybe I have to put in new bathrooms on the second floor and modernize it. So I'm going to plug in $35 a square foot for those 2 floors. and that generates a total hard cost of just over $1 million. So then I go to the next tab on that worksheet, and this tallies up both the total development cost, your budget, and it includes, we plug in soft costs. So soft costs are everything that, like I said, it's not hard costs. It's your engineering, your permitting, your financing fees. You got to pay an architect, you got to pay an engineer, and so that comes at some cost. So generally, professional fees about 7.5%. Developer fee. If you're working with a developer, they're going to take a developer fee. Ask them what they're taking, because I think they need to keep the lights on, and they need to pay. When the contract that I'm doing with the Laramie Main Street Alliance, where I'm actually acting kind of as the developer consultant, I'm getting paid out of the developer fee, which is commonplace and included. Banks are accustomed to having that in their financing. And then don't forget your contingency, anywhere from 5 to 10%. When you do your financing, the banks are going to require it. You want it. Don't go cheap on it. I mean, especially if you're looking at a building that needs a lot of work. And also try to understand when you're going to start construction, because if you're thinking it and you think, well, we're still have to get control of it. There's, the farther out you are from swinging a hammer, keep a higher level contingency, because you're going to get inflation. So that's just something to think about when you're starting to put this together and understand that the real estate in your downtown. So once you kind of factor in your soft cost, this 15,000 square foot building that I've got in my downtown, I'm like, okay, it's going to cost about just under 1.2 million. So now what I want to do is go back and think about, okay, what can I do with it? And again, I want you to think like a developer would when they approach it. You may not take on the role of developer, but you may be asked to come in and support and provide resources to help with a DOLA grant. So you want to understand that you're applying your public resources appropriately to a good end. And so, I looked at my market and I said, I think I can get $900 per month for a unit. I did my research. I think I looked at what the HUD fair market rents are for 1,000 square foot unit. And so I have 8 units of just 1 bedroom. I can get $86,000 a year in the rent and gross rent. And then commercial, there's 4,500 square foot. Maybe there are 2 units of commercial, but I think I can get about $9 a square foot for it in my downtown. And so I'm going to get about 40,000. So add that together, and my gross rent is 126,000 roughly. I'm going to subtract out a vacancy loss, because and usually about 7% works. Banks will look, 7 to 10%. They'll ask for a higher vacancy loss if they think it's risky. That's a good way to tell like what other people think of it, the financing folks. But 7% is a good play. And even if you say, I've got a tenant lined up, they're going to take everything. I got a waiting list of residential, you still have to put in a vacancy loss. I mean, if you lose a retail tenant for a month or a month and a half, you're going to lose that income. Banks want to understand that, because they want to understand your capacity to obligate debt, to put the money into the building, or to reinvest in the building. So my effective gross income, that's after vacancy loss, 118,000 over here. And then you have to take out your expenses, your fixed expenses, your variable, what are you going to have to pay to shovel the snow out front on the sidewalk, or you have to pay taxes on anything, if the HVAC, the furnace breaks, you take an operating reserve, that 3%, you put it in the bank, you leave it, and then when the roof needs to be fixed, then you draw from that. So again, you take another 10% off the top for those fixed expenses, and then you are left with your net operating income of 106,000. I'm going to get back to that. That's the income that I was talking about from a developer perspective. That's what developers are buying, that number. They're not buying, again, they're not buying a building, they're buying that number. That's what's key. And then if you take or people with a debt coverage ratio. So you go to a bank and you say, hey, bank, we project, I worked through this great spreadsheet that Mike provided to me, and we've got around 100,000 of income. And the bank's going to say, okay, well, we're going to divide that by 1.25. That's your debt coverage ratio. So the bank's going to say, I want to see $1.25 in income for every dollar that you can apply to obligate debt. So they're going to even give it another haircut on top of that. So now you go through that process. The bank's going to look and say, I've got about $85,000 available to go out and obligate debt. So, and again, remember, so this will be in the spreadsheet. So remember income. So this is where it gets fun. This is where you bring everything together, your costs, your income, you throw it all on one page, and you get to figure out where you are. If you're dealing with a developer, make sure the developer's putting in equity. They want to have skin in the game. Sometimes that equity will take the form of the building itself, but make sure they don't have debt already obligated on the building. You could do sometimes if you work with your community and they'll waive fees. I think some of the DOLA money, the dollars, the planning grants that are available are looking at the fees, programs to waive or reduce fees to help make some of these project works. I just plugged in 10,000 just as a number, but think about that a little bit as an opportunity. And then you have a total equity contribution of 127. So the loan is based on, so what I do in this spreadsheet is I just look at the maximum loan you can get based on the income from the building. But keep in mind, there's another level that's going to happen with the bank. You have to go through an appraisal, and the bank is going to do an appraisal, and they're going to say, oh, Mike, wait a minute, you want a loan for 1.2 million? Well, when this building's done, it may only be worth 900,000. So they're generally going to want to make sure that whatever they loan you is only 75% of the value of the building when completed. So this may be a little bit high, but at least it gives you kind of a point of reference. And I can kind of show you how you can derive the income and understand where you are with the bank or, with the loan to value. And so I looked at it and I said, for 525,000, I can get it's pretty cheap for a 15,000 square foot building that only needs $1 million of investment. There's a gap of 215,000. So it's green, which means that's good. It means this could be a viable project, provided that the developer puts in their equity and everything goes well. Because when you do construction and real estate, everything always goes well, and there's nothing ever goes wrong or you discover anything. So I say that kind of jokingly. Doing development is a series of problem-solving exercises. So be prepared for that. Something will come up. You'll get into the building and you'll find out that, I did a building once in downtown Loveland. We started demolition and we found a beehive that was like literally the entire length of a wall. I mean, it was probably like 8 million bees. And the demo hit the wall. We were doing an addition to a historic theater. We took down this old building, it's falling apart. And all of a sudden this like swarm of bees just shot up like it was the most amazing thing you've ever seen. And the demo contractor walked off and said, we can't do anything until you get rid of it. So I had to go find a beekeeper or a bee something to kind of deal with these bees in the wall. So stuff happens. That's why you have a contingency. And when getting back to when people say no, and I told you I'm going to get into that, because when stuff like that happens, you get the I told you so people that come out, and that's always very frustrating. So anyway, let's talk about a little bit of a different scenario. So now all of a sudden you do all this and you realize this is a good project, we should go forward with it. And then the owner of the building says, well, since it's a viable project and you're interested, I'm going to double my price now, because I'm going to now it's instead of the acquisition cost of 525, I'm going to charge you $1 million because you have a good project. And I didn't see your vision before, but now I do. And so now I know it's undervaluing, so now it's $1 million. So now you go back, you plug in a different number and you realize, okay, now our surplus, our project that we thought was viable, now we've got a $250,000 gap. And it shows up it'll show up in red when you do it. So then now this is where you come in, because you want to make things work. So you have to kind of start figuring out these solutions. Again, another, your construction cost could just double. I'll tell you the one I'm doing in Laramie, I did new ground up housing in Loveland. We did it for 160 ground up. I mean, literally from $160,000 a door. So if you average the price, the cost of 100 units, it was $160,000 a door. And I went up to Laramie and was all confident and ready with my developer hat on. And I said, we could probably do this for 150. I mean, it's already the building, the elevator was already in place. There's some advantages they had with this building. And lo and behold, we're closing next week and we're just under $200,000 a door for a building that already exists. So stuff like this happens, and I think you have to be prepared for it, and you have to be ready, not be ready to give up, because I think, like I said, development is it's a long, challenging process, but your ability to kind of to be persistent, I think is what is most important to get a positive outcome. But so now you go back, the construction costs they doubled. Again, your financial gap increases. So you have to figure out kind of what you're going to do. And I'll talk a little bit about that, about the strategies you can think about, how you can deal with it. But I'm going to take a little bit of a sidestep because I want to talk a little bit about market capitalization rates. Because if anybody has heard the term cap rates, brokers will throw it out all the time. And it's understanding how you determine the value of a building. It's a really simple way to say, what's the building going to be worth when it's done? And so you could take your net operating income, if you remember the net operating income that we'd shared before, the 86,000, you divide that by cap rate. In this case, this is a listing for a presentation I did in North Dakota, but it was a Dollar General. They put a 5.75% cap rate. So you divide 84,000 divided by 5.75%, and you get an estimated value of 1.4. Now, the one thing I'll tell you about cap rates is they're a little counterintuitive. It took me a long time to wrap my brain around it. The higher the percentage, the riskier the project and the lower the value. So the lower the cap rate, means that the less risky the project. So this one, it's a Dollar General. They're a national credit tenant. They probably have a 15-year lease. And so they can put the cap rate really low and nobody will argue with it. When I started in 2008, right after the recession we had, developers were coming in with 15%, 20% cap rates, especially in markets where you haven't had development. And so they're gonna really look at it, they tend to look at it kind of as more risky projects. So, but with that aside, this is just a real simple way to kind of understand, where you can do your own, valuations for these projects that you're looking at. And then the loan to value, which I referenced before, again, when you're thinking about how much debt can a project, how much can it absorb based on the income. So you have, this is the looking at the the net operating income, 106,000, you divide that by 7%. So, you end up with a value of 1.5 million roughly. And then you divide that or multiply that by 75% and you say 1.138. Okay, so I can reasonably obligate debt on this building up to about 1.138 million. And it's going to be different. This is one example. You may do something where you're talking hundreds of thousands or 75, 100,000, not the formula or it all applies. This is just one example. So when you start to look at some of the buildings in your community, if you get to this and you get confused again, feel free to reach out. I'm not, we're as a professional, I love I love going through this stuff, so I'm always up for taking a call and helping people kind of work through some of these issues and understanding. You know, Matt might get mad at me but I love to talk. So feel free to call me anytime and say, Mike, I'm confused, and I can kind of work with you to get it. I'd rather have you get to this point and do this piece, because I think it's a great way to understand, you know, it's a great way for you to kind of save some of that money so that you can use it when you really need it. When you need to hire an architect, or you need to go forward with use your money where you need it most. And your ability to do this, I think, it will help you immensely, I hope. So, you know, stepping back to, you know, where I told you that your construction cost doubled, the property owner all of a sudden gets flaking out and wants to double the price. And it's your responsibility to close that financial gap. And so, you know, you're going to get the "I told you so" people that'll come out and say, "See, I told you it's complicated. We can't do," you know, and that's that. And I've learned, and you know, you have to just have a little block some of that out and figure out, okay, what can we do, you know, at this point? So, you know, maybe you look at phasing the project. I mean, maybe you get, if you could get control of the building, you know, first, maybe you just focus, say, I just want to let's just get control of the building. I'll tell you one thing, I'm going to editorialize for a second. When you go into, especially in public communities, and they say, oh, we don't want to buy because it's too complicated, it's too, you know, it's too risky to buy the building. You're buying a tangible asset. So even if you buy the building and the project, you can never able to get the project up. The building and the property still has some value. So it's not like if you give a grant money away and you go, you know, hire someone, or, you know, and you pay for $80,000 for a plan and you never do anything, that's money forgone. If you buy a building, you still have that asset. So I've always made that case with the leadership that, look, you know, it is a tangible asset. And again, you're in the forever business. You know, you're here, you are working for, you know, long-term, build legacy, build sustainability in your community. And sometimes, you know, especially with those absentee landlords, you just have to get them out of the way. And it's not fun, but I think if you can get that asset, even if it's in bad condition, it still is an asset. It still has some value. So think about that a little bit. Seeking other sources of funding. I said, right now, it's a great time to be doing this, because, you know, DOLA's got money. They're throwing money right now at the $1271 to do acquisition, to do rehab, to do infrastructure. You know, so think about that a little bit. You know, you can apply some of those funding. There's also historic preservation funding. You know, if you have a building that has some historic character, and you want to go through that process, you know, the state has historic funding available. The tax credits are a little more challenging, and I think for larger projects, I've only seen that once. And actually, that deal I just found out fell through. So those are the bigger federal tax credits are challenging, but you know, you can get the state historic fund grant to help to offset some of those costs. And you know, and look at changing the scope. I don't always changing the scope. I don't recommend, because you know, when you do these projects and you say, well, we need to save 50,000 here, and then 10 years from now, you're like, why didn't we just do it? So be careful when you start to change scope, because you know, that can create, you know, you're taking a return over decades. So think about it. You know, a normal developer will take a return over 3, 5, or 7 year kind of window. You're in the forever business. You're going to take it over 50 years. So, you know, the project you do now will be paying dividends for you decades into the future. So think about that. Think about it more on the long term. That's the one distinction with kind of, you know, thinking like a developer, that, you know, between what you're trying to do and what a developer is, you know, your return threshold is much longer. So just a couple bit of resources. Again, I brought up the DOLA housing grants. There's also a group called the Housing Assistance Council. It's a DC, actually, it's an old colleague of mine who's the executive director. They actually do pre-development grant funding for communities. So, you know, when you get to that point where you want to bring an architect on and you want to, you know, you want to start building the the permit set to do the project. They have some pre-development funding at low interest that you can access. Same with the USDA Rural Development. They have pre-development funding that's available. Because it's always the most challenging part is that the pre-development, the window at the very beginning that I told you before, what's the riskiest, where you're putting the money into the project, but you're not getting anything back yet. So check out some of these different these entities. I think that might be you might be able to get some funding and help you kind of get over the hump. So this is my final coming to the end. Tracy, I see you're coming on, so I'm assuming I'm running out of time, but my key takeaways: persistence is a virtue. Remember that you need to be persistent. If you control the real estate, you control your future. Focus on getting control of the real estate is the first step. Investment follows vision. Know what you want and what you need in your community. Developers are like water. They follow the path of least resistance. So, you need to make it easy, but not so easy. So we'll get into that. But, luck is when preparation meets opportunity. That's why I say when you start thinking about these buildings, understand, be ready to move quickly, because sometimes opportunities won't present themselves immediately. And it takes time. And again, I said this multiple times, we are in the forever business. Think about your returns over a long period of time and when you're looking at these things. So I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you found it beneficial. You have the spreadsheet. If you have any questions or if you get stuck on anything, please feel free to reach out. More than happy to talk. And I think I can hang around for a few extra minutes if anybody has any questions. But if not, thank you. And Tracy, I'll turn it back over to you.
Well, thank you, Mike, and thank you again all for joining us. And I can certainly stay on the call a little bit longer too to take questions and answers as well. As we mentioned at the beginning of this session, Mike, this was a great groundwork for some of our future sessions where we're going to dive into some of those other funding sources a little bit: tax credits, state historical fund, energy money, as well as grant writing skills to maybe help you pursue some of these avenues. We're also hoping to get somebody lined up eventually here about how to stack funds and really get some of these more difficult projects, and I'm thinking particularly preservation projects to pencil out. That is certainly the forever game, and it's the long-term vision, really. I mean, you have to have patience for it all. Mike, I did notice that your colleague Matt, and maybe you mentioned this, but I don't know what LISC stands for, so if you addressed it, I don't know. But in terms of pre-development activities?
Oh, I'm gonna stop the, say that again, I'm sorry,
Yeah, Matt, why don't you unmute yourself and ask the question verbally?
Yeah, Mike, one of the things that I think was instrumental in getting Laramie and that project off the ground, they were able to do a LISC grant. Can you talk a little bit about that program and how that might be helpful to some folks in the...
Yeah, the LISC, if people aren't familiar, it's a Local Initiative Support Corporation. They're a national nonprofit. They look at kind of rural or low-income communities. And I think you have to apply to be a member. There aren't very many members in Colorado, which is unfortunate, but I think they provided a $20,000 pre-development grant to the Laramie Main Street Alliance, which helped bring in people like me and hire the architect to actually do some of that work. And then we wrap that grant or the pre-development, it's a zero interest loan, into the financing to pay it off when we close on financing. So again, I didn't really get into it in a lot of detail, but the biggest challenge, I mean, when you're starting a project, it's really the beginning, because you need, especially with developers, and I think there's a question also, which I'll address, about public-private partnerships. But when you're starting a project and you don't know what the revenue is going to be, you don't know how much it's going to cost to rehab the building. You're really, you're putting money in hiring architects and engineers and environmental folks. You're spending a lot of money, but you're not getting a lot of money back in on that income. And that's why I say developers are like water. They follow the path of least resistance. If they can look at a building and say, I know I'm going to get X amount of dollars out of it, then they'll say, okay, I'll take the headache to hire an architect or do whatever I need to do because I know I'm going to get income. If I'm in a lot of the smaller communities where they don't have it's not as clear the income path, they're not going to want to spend that money at the front end. That's why where you step in and say, okay, we'll take that on. We'll kind of take that on and kind of set the stage to make this thing work, either getting control of real estate, getting architects to understand what the cost is, to do environmental remediation, to get to the point where, that path is a little bit clearer. So I think that, looking at those sorts of funding, I think can be very helpful. The USDA has it, LISC has it, the Housing Assistance Council, they have pre-development funding. So take a look at that. And then I think, Cynthia, you had a question about public-private partnerships. I think, it's kind of a broad question. I think they're important if you can, if you have a private investor that's willing to work with you. But again, I think at the beginning, you want to be able to come into that discussion as an equal partner and understand that the money, because if the benefit ultimately accrues to the private investor, and that's okay, there's nothing wrong with that. But I think you want to make sure that they're not just taking your money, using your money to invest to make their own money. You want to make sure that your money is well spent, that it's for specific purposes, and that for whatever you put in, when you start to put in on a partnership, you become an equity investor. So you are, and think about yourself as an equity investor in a public-private partnership. And what is it that you're going to get in return? I've looked at work structured deals where you get you can build in a return with the property sale. If the developer sells it within 10 years, you get a return back or portion of those sale proceeds. Just because, I think it's important. We all need to be good stewards, and we need to make sure we generate income to ourselves so that